not miss your opportunity. All right, let's get started, please. I don't know why this thing is way over here, but. I can do it. Just hold
Tom's
it.
coming.
Hello?
Perfect.
That's much
Hello?
better. We have, how many people do we have on the telephone? Will you identify yourselves?
Yes, Jerry Strasser, Texas A&M.
This is Angie Wright from Angela State.
This is Karen Murray from Tarleton State University.
Mark Marino from MD Anderson Cancer Center on for Ben Melson.
Dana White from Sam Houston State University.
Ed Hugitz from the University of Houston downtown.
Cesar Maldonado, Houston Community College.
Anyone else? All right, well, thank you very much. First of all, I want to express our gratitude here at the Coordinating Board for all of you coming to this meeting just before the onset of a holiday weekend. I also want to express my
The University of Houston downtown.
Cesar Maldonado, Houston Community College.
Angelica Hill, UT Southwestern.
of the 60 by 30 Texas timeline. We will,
They can't hear you online, so
Okay.
I have this for you. There you go.
well, I'll just use that. So ideally, we should be 1/3 of our way towards our goals for 60 by 30 Texas. And obviously, with the setbacks caused by the storm, that might be even more difficult. And the challenges would be if circumstances had stayed normal. We are going to we're going to ask you to take into account that all your work is being done in the context of 60 by 30 Texas. I think all of you understand that 60 by 30 Texas and its goals is absolutely essential to the economic competitiveness of Texas and to the quality of life in Texas. We simply must achieve those goals if we hope to remain economically competitive and maintain a high quality of life for our residents. We have some issues we want you to address as a way of recognizing something I keep saying over and over again in regard to 60 by 30 Texas, and that is we can't get there from here. We can't do business as usual and hit the goals of 60 by 30 Texas. There has to be dramatic innovation in higher education. There has to be a series of game changers. We have to think about delivering and providing education in different ways. That's one of the reasons we're asking you to take a look at competency-based education and look at the ways that we can fund it appropriately so that we can provide adequate resources to those institutions that are being innovative and finding ways to deliver education more efficiently and at, we hope, lower cost. We're asking you to take a look at some dual credit issues. Once again, there are a lot of questions about funding and the way we conduct a dual credit. I think many of you know this is a little bit off your assignment, but nevertheless, it's important contextual information. I'm very concerned about dual credit and its expansion. We now have more students in Texas taking dual credit courses that are deemed college ready. Significantly more students. By my calculations, we have about 110, 115,000 students in Texas that are college ready, whether they're seniors, juniors, or sophomores. I don't think we have many freshmen that are. But we have over 140,000 students taking dual credit courses. And the question that occurs to me is, how well can they be doing in genuine college-level courses if they're not college-ready? So that's an issue that provides some of the context for the work that we're asking you to do on dual credit. We're going to make another run. I know a lot of you are probably tired of hearing about this, but we're going to make another run at performance-based funding for universities. We're going to tinker, if we have to, with the graduation bonus concept. And once again, I point out that there's evidence from around the country that performance-based funding, if done properly, does work. And we need to do a lot better in terms of graduation rates than we currently are. I point out that if you look at the 6-year graduation rates for our public universities in Texas, overall they're about 59%, just under 60% over a 6-year period for any cohort of university students. That's not satisfactory by anybody's standards. It's an improvement of over where we were in 2000 when we launched Closing the Gaps, but it's still unsatisfactory. And if you take a look at our graduation rates from another perspective, if you pull UT Austin and Texas A&M out of the calculation, because those are by far the two most selective institutions, universities in the state with the highest graduation rates, the 6-year graduation rates for our other 36 universities is about 49%. I don't know how you could consider that anything but a substantial failure on the part of higher education in Texas. So we're looking for ways. We've seen evidence from around the country that incentivizing different levels of performance and incentivizing innovation makes a difference. There was an article last week, or maybe it was the beginning of this week. There was an article in Chronicle of Higher Education that pointed out that there are a large number of institutions in the country that have improved their graduation rates in double figures over a 5-year period. But in every case they made dramatic change to the way they delivered education to their students. In every case. And once again, that gets back to the point that I articulated just a moment ago. We can't get there from here. And I think that we need to be much more receptive to change. I know that the graduation bonus or going to performance-based funding based on graduation troubles a lot of people. We've run simulations, and for the vast majority of universities in Texas, there's no more variation in state appropriations to universities through the formula if we did the graduation bonus than what occurs when there are variations in enrollments. And there are variations in enrollments every year in Texas. So we've talked to experts around the country. For example, we had Mark Becker, the president of Georgia State University, come make a presentation to the coordinating board, and he pointed out that when he first became president, he knew they had to do things dramatically differently. He invested a significant amount of money in predictive analytics, which in his mind was probably the most important factor in improving graduation rates. And he invested something like $300,000. He said in just a couple of years, a retention and graduation rates were improving dramatically, and they recovered all that money that they had repurposed. And there are lots of stories around the country like that. But once again, we have to do things differently. I am quite certain that there's nobody in this room who would defend a 6-year graduation rate of 49%. So those are some of the things that we have to do. Once again, bear in mind, it's obviously going to be a very tough budget environment over the next few years in Texas. We have to demonstrate that we can get better results, not necessarily with more money or less money, but we need to get better results, period. We'll make the strongest argument we can in favor of appropriate levels of support for higher education, but take into account as you deliberate that we're in a tough budget environment already. Any questions or comments before we meet as a group? Okay, Julie, what's the next step?
Okay, well, we are going to break out into 3 groups. And we have actually supplied phone numbers for those folks who are going to be heading to a different room. So our 2-year colleges are going to be going to the Lone Star room on the 2nd floor. So up a flight, and it's at the back of the hallway on the right. And again, we'll have a conference line ready to go there. Our health-related institutions are going to go right next door into the Tejas room. You can go right through the doors here. And our general academics are going to stay in this room. They'll be meeting here. We're going to continue to broadcast that as as we're broadcasting this meeting. So the folks who are listening in for that one can still see the broadcast online, and we've had our committee members call in. If you want to take 5 minutes as you move to your meeting, please do so. But given that we have lots of folks who have, important work they're doing at their institutions that they need to get back to, let's try to keep the break short and begin in 5 minutes. So again, thank you all very much for coming, and you can head to your rooms. And there are staff members who would be happy to take you there too. I believe we have 2 staff who will be in each of the rooms with you. Thank you, Commissioner.
from the University of Houston downtown, and I'm serving as the convening chair. I want everyone to be advised that this meeting is being broadcast over the internet and recorded, so I would ask all attendees to silence your cell phones, please. For those attending via a teleconference, please mute your phone until you are ready to speak. This prevents background noise. From the University of Houston downtown. So we have a full agenda. I'd like to get started. So let's begin by Mr. Keaton, who will serve as my eyes for this session. I'm sorry I can't be there. Will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Funk Baxter?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Ms. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Davidson?
Here.
Dr. Gallant?
Here.
Dr. Hoyt? Dr. Hoyt? Mr. Hugetz?
I'm here.
Dr. Keller? Mr. Kurapati? Dr. Marquardt? Dr. Murray?
Here.
Dr. Short?
I'm here.
Ms. Sloan?
Here.
Dr. Strauser?
Here.
Ms. Wright?
Here.
How many do we have?
Thank you, Tom, and I believe everyone in their materials has a list of our members. Have we missed?
Mr. Hugetz, we do have a quorum present.
That's good.
Wonderful.
Mr. Keaton, I apologize. This is Dana Hoyt. My phone cut off when I was needing to respond, so I am on the phone again.
Thank you, Dr. Hoyt.
Just as a reminder, members on the call are permitted to vote, and due to the remote attendance of members, votes will be done by roll call. That would be a little slower, but it'll get everybody in. I would like to welcome the committee members and thank them for their attendance. Our first agenda item for your consideration is the election of a chair of the committee. Do I hear a nomination for chair?
Mr. Brown wants to speak here.
I nominate Ed Hugetz.
Is there a second?
Second, this is Dana Hoyt.
Are there any discussions or any other nominations? If not, Mr. Keaton, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, thank you. And for the purpose of this vote, please respond aye if you're in favor, nay if you oppose, or present if you abstain. Ms. Funk Baxter?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Ms. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. Davidson?
Aye.
Dr. Gallant?
Aye.
Dr. Hoyt?
Aye.
Mr. Hugetz?
Aye.
Dr. Keller? Mr. Kurapati? Dr. Marquardt? Dr. Murray?
Aye.
Dr. Short?
Yeah.
Ms. Sloan?
Aye.
Dr. Strauser?
Aye.
Ms. Wright?
Aye.
The passes.
Okay. I guess I should thank everybody for their confidence in me. I'll do the best I can, and I hope we have a successful committee meeting. As the commissioner has indicated, we have big challenges in front of us, so let's all try to do the best we can. Second, we need the election of a vice chair. Do I have a motion?
Yes, this is Dana Hoyt. I nominate Kathy Funk Baxter for vice chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Bob Brown, seconds.
Danny.
I stand corrected. Danny Gallant, seconds.
Mr. Keaton, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Funk Baxter?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Ms. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. Davidson?
Aye.
Dr. Gallant? Dr. Hoyt?
Aye.
Ms. Hugetts?
Aye.
Dr. Keller? Mr. Kurpati? Dr. Marquardt? Dr. Murray?
Aye.
Dr. Short?
Aye.
Ms. Sloan?
Aye.
Dr. Strauser?
Aye.
Ms. Wright?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Very good. Without any other discussion, let's move on to item 3. This will be a presentation by Dr. Julie Eklund. And after the presentation, we will have a chance to have questions and discussion. So, Julie, do you want to proceed?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Hugetts. And I did want to take a moment also, because some of you aren't here with us, to introduce the other coordinating board staff who are here. Of course, you've heard from Mr. Tom Keaton. He's the director of the funding area and the strategic planning and funding division. I'm the assistant commissioner in that division. And we also have with us Ms. Jennifer Gonzalez, and she is a senior program director. Many of you may remember Mr. Paul Turcotte, who served this committee ably for many, many years. He has actually left the agency and is with one of our institutions, so we're very pleased he's able to serve them in that way. I have a presentation which I hope all of you have available who aren't with us. We did share the PowerPoint. This is just a general overview of formula funding for the general academic institutions. Do feel free to interrupt as I move through it, or as Dr. Hugetts mentioned, we'll be happy to take questions at the end. Okay, and do I have a remote? Are we going to be able to show it on the main screen here? Well, I'm going to begin, and they'll see if they can get it up on the screen for those of you who are listening in who don't have the presentation. Unless we can do it quickly. Okay, so the formulas are designed to objectively and equitably allocate the amount the legislature funds to the institutions. The Legislative Budget Board divides the funding among the institutions using the coordinating board's collected institutional data. So the data that we collect is used to feed these formulas. Institutions directly receive this funding in the General Appropriations Act. The allocations are not a budgeting mechanism, and they are transferable across strategies with some exceptions, and a good example of that would be TRB debt service. Okay, I'm going to move on to the third slide. The process starts now with all of you, with the advisory committee meetings that will take place this fall. You will examine and consider changes to the formulas, of course focusing on the commissioner's charges to the committee. Your chairs will present the committee's recommendations to the commissioner in February. And in March, the Committee for Affordability, Accountability, and Planning, that's one of our board committees, will consider the formula advisory committees and the commissioner's recommendations, and then they will forward their modified recommendations to the coordinating board. In April, at their April meeting, the board will adopt its final recommendation. Okay, on to the next slide. On June 1st, the board's recommendation is sent to the Legislative Budget Board and the Governor's Office of Budget Planning and Policy. Then, the coordinating board will submit its initial formula funding run, which incorporates the board's recommendations. These are sent to the Legislative Budget Board on November 1st. That initial or preliminary run will include data from calendar year 2018. So that's going to be spring, summer, and fall of 2018. The appropriations bills will be considered in the winter of 2019 using this initial data. Okay. And then I'm moving on to the next slide. The final formula funding run is submitted to the LBB on March 1st. It'll include base year 2019 data, and that's going to be summer and fall 2018 and spring 2019. So one thing that can be hard to get straight is that we don't have fiscal year data. The data for the base years is slightly different. We're happy to help if that gets confusing, and it is in this PowerPoint as needed. In May 2019, the legislature will use the final data to allocate formula funding to each institution in the General Appropriations Act. And of course, the legislature makes the final determination of what the appropriated amounts will be. Okay, next slide, and thank you, Tom. It looks like we're up and running now. Formula funding isn't intended to cover all expenses. Its intended uses and ineligible expenses are listed to the right of this chart. All funds formula revenues are represented by the two dark green slices on the outer ring of this pie chart. These consist of formula general revenue and appropriated tuition and fees. These amounts accounted for 19% of the institution's FY 2016 revenues. Institutions reported, and this is through the Sources and Uses report, revenues of $13.9 billion in fiscal year 2016. $5.2 billion were state appropriated, of which $1.7 billion were formula general revenue, and $1 billion was student-paid statutory tuition and fees. Next slide. The GAI sector is allocated with two formulas and two supplements. The operation support formula supports instructional operations. It's based on census date enrollments. Enrollments are weighted by cost. Institutions receive an additional 10% when an undergraduate course is taught by a tenured or tenure-track professor. The infrastructure formula supports facility operations and utilities. It is based on predicted square feet, not actual. Smaller institutions receive an additional appropriation referred to as the Small Institution Supplement, and I'll be saying a little bit more about that later. Next slide. So here's the operation support formula. An institution's I&O formula funding is calculated by multiplying the funding rate by its weighted semester credit hours. And here's the teaching experience supplement formula, and it's funded using the same formulas as the I&O, except the calculation is limited to undergraduate semester credit hours taught by tenure and tenure-track professors. And of course, 10%, as I mentioned that before, of this subset is added to the amount funded for I&O. Okay, this gets more detailed. This is the space support calculation. So instead of weighting semester credit hours, the formula is based on predicted square feet. These are the result of the space model, which estimates the amount of space an institution needs, taking into account its enrollments, faculty, research expenditures, and other metrics. An institution's funding is the product of the funding rate, its predicted square feet, and the sum of two factors. And these two factors are designed to shift more funding to institutions that pay more utilities. So they're determined using the annual utilities surveys, which is completed by the institutions. The O&M, or operations and maintenance factor, is the ratio of statewide reported education and general expenditures for O&M to the total education and general expenditures. In FY 2016, the institution's O&M expenditures made up about 59% of the total E&G expenditures for facilities support. Therefore, the O&M factor for this last biennium was 59%, or 58.87 to be exact. Thank you, Tom. And the utility factor is the complement of that, or 41.13%, multiplied by the institution's utility rate adjustment. The utility rate adjustment is the percent above or below the statewide average an institution pays for utilities. If an institution pays the statewide average for utilities, the sum of these two factors would be 1, and the institution's funding would be its predicted square feet times the funding rate. If utilities run higher than average, the institution receives proportionately more funding. Okay, next slide. Finally, institutions with fall enrollment headcounts less than 10,000 receive a portion of $1.5 million per biennium as a small institution supplement. So institutions with enrollments below 5,000 will receive the full amount. The amount tapers off at $150 for each additional headcount per year. So, for example, an institution with 9,999 headcount enrollment would receive $300 for the biennium. One with 10,000 students headcount enrollment would receive nothing. So it tapers, again, as I noted. This supplement is intended to assist smaller institutions in managing the burden of fixed costs, which are spread over fewer students for these schools. Next slide. The general academic institution sector received $4.75 billion in formula funding for fiscal year 2018-2019. This was a 1.6% increase over the previous biennium. The operations support rate increased from 55 39 to 55.82. Oh, and actually, there was an increase in growth of 1.8% overall, and then the support rate increased from 55.39 to 55.82. The space support rate decreased from $5.55 per square foot to $5.27. Correct, Tom? And then I also did want to note when we talk about the GAIs, the Lamar two-year colleges and the TSTCs are included in the facilities formula, but not the INO, not the instruction and operations formula. So when we refer to GAIs, they are included in part of these formulas. Okay, and then the next slide, this is just a summary of what I just walked you through, and it shows the breakdown for the 2018-2019 biennium, so you can see the operations support, the space support, the teaching supplement, and the small institution supplement. Okay, this next chart shows rates per weighted semester credit hour and predicted square feet from the year 2000 to the current year. The operations support, or probably to the 18-19. The operations support rate is up 3% from the 2000 to 2001 biennium, and the space support rate is down 27% over that same period. Next slide. The red and green stacked bars on this chart show the formula funding general revenue from 2000 to current. So that's all formulas and supplements less general revenue dedicated. Formula funding general revenue increased 36% from $2.5 billion in 2000-2001 to, or I should say approximately $2.5 billion, to $3.4 billion for the 18-19 biennium. Institutions increased tuition and fee collections from about $2.3 billion in 2000-2001 to an estimated $9.3 billion in 18-19, which is a 305% increase. Okay, and finally, on a per full-time student equivalent basis, the formula funding general revenue from 2000 to current decreased 12% from $7.05 billion for the 2001 biennium to $6.23 billion for the 18-19 biennium, as shown here. Non-appropriated tuition and fee collections increased an estimated 163% over this period on a full-time student equivalent basis. Thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. I'm sure some of it you're very familiar with, but we wanted to provide the overview and offer you an opportunity to ask any general questions you might have about the formula and how it works, or I should say the formulas and how they work for the general academics.
Julie, would you just say a little bit for the new members about how the cost study works to drive the matrix of the formula?
Yes, and in fact, I'd be happy to talk in more detail about the cost study at a later meeting if you would like a longer presentation. Jennifer, would you like to speak to that? I see you arrived. Okay.
In general, the level that the student is taking, whether it's undergrad, lower level, upper level, master's, doctoral, or special professional, and then it also takes the programs that they're in. There's 20 different programs that they could be in, and it essentially weights the semester credit hours to what the cost of the liberal arts level would do. Y'all have noticed some compression in the numbers, meaning that it's getting closer to the cost to do the liberal arts, even in the higher programs, is what that is being reported through the cost study.
And this is a good time to point out that on our website, there is an area where we have finance information, and we do have detailed information about the cost study, or often it's referred to as the expenditure study. You'll hear it both ways, and we do include the matrix there, so you can see the 20 different disciplines and some of the different inputs that go in for those disciplines. And I'll take a minute to show you where that is, but it is on the finance page that you can reach through. That'd be great if you could share that and where we have the cost study information.
This is Susan Brown, and I was just wondering if anybody had looked into it enough to know
why that liberal arts, why it's compressing so much. I know the dollars per SCH in liberal arts has gone up quite a bit, but I don't have a clue as to why it's not going up faster in the other areas to match how fast it's going up there. So has anybody looked at that at their campus, or is that something we could look into a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that Julia suggested that maybe at a later meeting, since the cost study drives so much the matrix and the weights that determine, the ultimate allocation, that it might be good to kind of reflect on, where we've come over the years in terms of the matrix itself. And the liberal arts, the change in the liberal arts would be one of the questions that we could explore. I just think it would give the committee a good handle on what are the dynamics that are affecting the change in appropriations, and their mix of credit hours is a big determinant.
Yes, I think that's an excellent idea. We're happy. I, in fact, did a presentation on the matrix to an interim committee about a year and a half ago, so we have something prepared. And we have taken a look at it to try to, there's obviously a lot of variables that go into that, and there's several things that we talked about that may be making a difference, but I think it would probably be worthwhile to really dig in, provide details on exactly how that cost study works, and if all of you we'll be happy to share some things before the next meeting, so you can also look at it and think about it. But certainly we'd be open to talking about what's happening and maybe if there's possible revisions as we're looking at it and seeing how it's functioning.
Tom, is there any other questions out there or comments?
I don't see any yet.
Tom, I do have one.
1 second, Bob Brown.
I think we need to spend a good amount of time inside that cost matrix to understand the way it's happening. And I hope, this is my first time on the committee, but I hope we're kind of free maybe to, as we get through, to maybe even challenge the basic assumptions on how that cost matrix translates into formula funding. I think it's probably been decades since that was evaluated, and I hope we have an aggressive group in here to go and think through that some more.
Yes, we're happy to support you in that and provide any materials that you may need.
Bob, I'm curious if you have a specific thing that you'd like to kind of look at.
I'd like to offer that committee with some data rather than speak generally today, but I think I have seen some things in the way the formula works at my institution that may be unintended.
Okay. In terms of incentives, of unintended incentives that are occurring?
I don't know if unintended incentives, unintended consequences.
Okay.
They're two different subjects.
Okay. Anyway, I think that will be helpful in opening up the whole picture of the way the formula is working. So we'll definitely schedule that. Any other questions for Julie at this point? I'm particularly anxious for the new members to get a handle on the basic framework of the way that the formula works. So there's no question that we all started at one point not understanding it. So don't feel embarrassed about if a part of it is not clear. I mean, if there's any part of this that you'd like to kind of understand, please ask at this point.
And we have a
Gallant has a
question.
point.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Ed. This is Danny Gallant from Stephen Boston. What is the process whereby we submit recommendations for discussions, just as you've heard today? Do we send those to you or to whom? Because I think we're going to have some concerns, as Bob and Susan has expressed.
I've lost the sound. I can't hear the question.
Ed, can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you, yes.
Okay, that sounds kind of like a commercial. This is Danny Gallant from Stephen F. Austin. What is the process whereby we submit topics for discussion, certainly in the context of the cost study and other things that developed? Do we send them to you or to Julie, to Tom, or what's?
If I may interject, traditionally, those have been sent to the chair, and then the chair has shared them with me and my staff.
Perfect, thank you.
If that's all right with Dr. Hugetts.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's a good way. Let's start that way. And I would encourage anybody that has questions to please contact me so that we can get at the issues that you want to explore.
Perfect, thank you.
Does anybody have a question about the one thing that it might be good to look at is the recommendations. They're in the agenda materials. There is a page that shows sort of the history of the committee. Julie, is there a way that we can get that slide up?
Sure. And you mean in terms of the process, the 3 slides where we talked about the process, or are you referring to?
No, I'm referring to, it's on, in the slides that I've seen, or the agenda materials, it's on page 6.
Okay, yes.
Yes, it's the funding, formula funding recommendation history.
We're pulling up the agenda materials now.
Oh, yes, thank you. I see what you're referring to.
Yeah, just that one that's I think a good slide to give everybody a sense of where we've been and what's happened. On that slide, you see the what the committee's recommendation is. If there was a coordinating board recommendation, then you see that. And then you see the funded amount. So if you just look at the amount that the last formula committee reviewed, which was preparing for the biennium 2018-2019, you can see that the committee recommended an increase of support for INO to up to $58.99. The coordinating board modified that and put it at $56.67, and then the legislature funded it at $55.39 per weighted SCH. So this chart is a good track. You can see back in the 2010 and 11 biennium, we actually hit the high of the multiplier. It was at that point it was funded at $62.19. And I will tell you, since this is the 3rd time I've been on the committee, we've been aiming for getting back to $62.19 ever since. So it just, I just sort of want to point out that framework. Tom, any questions that the committee might have about that?
I see none.
Okay, not hearing any other questions, we'll move on, and we'll look forward to further discussions on this material and subsequent meetings. The agenda item number 4 deals with the commissioner's charge to the committee. And there are 3 charges. The first charge is to study and make recommendations for appropriate funding levels for operations support and space support for formulas, and the percent split between the utilities and operations and maintenance components of the space support formula. You know, this is a big part of our discussions. This is, as you saw in the history of the formula recommendations coming from the committee, one of our most important kind of tasks will be what are we going to recommend in terms of funding in the next biennium? What kind of multiplier are we going to recommend? In 2018 and 19, the biennial, the formulas were funded at $4,752,000,000. So that will give you an idea of the context. As the commissioner said, that we're in a very tough budget situation. The legislature, well, certainly the Senate, but the House too, ended the session pretty much saying that they were going to come back and revisit the formulas for higher education and looking at everything in terms of the way they appropriate funds. They pointed out the special interest in understanding the special items. Are there? We'll certainly, prepare to discuss this in subsequent meetings, particularly in September. I think we need to jump into this charge immediately. Are there any questions about this? Or any comments?
Ed, Dr. Gallant.
Okay.
This is Danny Gallant again. I have a question. This might go back a little bit, but I was just reflecting over the history in the context of what you're saying there. I'm curious as to why there is a difference between what the committee recommends and the coordinating recommends. Any perspective on that at this point in time, or is that a topic for a later meeting?
Julie, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, well, the committee makes recommendations to the commissioner, and then the commissioner provides recommendations to the coordinating board. And sometimes at that step, there might be changes, and the commissioner may make recommendations that do not align with what has been made by the committee. And that's part of why the committee chairs sit down and meet with the commissioner to talk through the recommendations, why those recommendations have been made. And then when the recommendations are brought to the board committee, the commissioner's recommendations are brought, but in addition, the committee chairs come and present the committee's recommendation. So the board hears both the commissioner recommendation and the committee's recommendation, and then the board will make a determination about what's most appropriate. And in some years, it's my understanding that there's been more variance than in other years. It just really depends on the year. And I don't know if, David, you'd like to add anything to that. This is David Gardner, who's our deputy commissioner, who's joined us.
People on the committees can remind me, but I think the discussions with the committee chairs led to largely agreement after discussing with the commissioner the changes that were made. I don't think they were aligned totally, but I think that's a very important discussion to have. But it's important that through this process, we communicate what's happening with the commissioner, so if there are concerns, we can bring them back to you before we reach that point. And I know Julie and her staff will be sure to do that.
Yes.
David, it's just interesting to note that the committee's recommendation in the last go-around was really to cover growth and inflation. There was an additional item of additional funding that we were seeking for the graduation bonus, but it doesn't seem like the committee's recommendation was outlandish. I mean, to go with growth and inflation, it seemed to be kind of a reasonable thing for higher education to request.
Ed, this is Dana. I want to, and David and Julie, I just want to make one comment on some of that. The recommendations out of the committee were finished, if I remember correctly, in early November, and then we worked through kind of some drafts. But then I know I visited with staff and with the commissioner, Commissioner Pradas, in the spring, or as we got closer to spring and looking at the recommendations to the full board. The projections that came out after we finished our meeting from the LBB were slightly different for the revenue estimates. And so I think that was some of the discussion on looking at growth and inflation, or just growth and not inflation, that kind of discussion based on the updated revenue estimates. And that was a little after we had finished meeting as a committee.
I appreciate that. I do recall that my own impression was that it was really had to do available revenue. That's what caused the big that's what caused the major difference between the committee and the CB recommendation. Just as a point of interest in terms of the meeting in September, Julie, I assume that we will have projections for enrollment as well as inflation that we will be able to kind of review in our discussion?
Well, in terms of our preliminary enrollment, because of the hurricane and because of the fact that we might have some institutions that may be a little later than usual in terms of providing their preliminary enrollments to us, I'm not sure we'll have as good of data as we may have had in the past. We will be collecting those preliminary enrollments for our board, and they meet in late October, so it may be the October meeting before we are able to provide much information on preliminary enrollments. We're certainly happy to run projections to give you some sense of what enrollments have typically done. And I think we actually included some of those for you in the materials. Is that correct, Tom? Yes, so you do have those. And, I know we recently heard that folks thought from several places they thought enrollments were going to be up, but I think we've got a whole different scenario now based on what's happened this last week. So we will do the best we can to provide you what is available.
Okay, thank you. Tom, any further questions or comments about charge number 1?
I see none.
Okay. Charge number 2 is to study and make recommendations for the appropriate funding level and for the refinement of the graduation bonus formula. Staff has laid out the prior committee's recommendation and the agenda materials for this meeting. Well, again, I think this is something we can talk to in September. I will just let the committee know this is one that I'm very biased on, and so you can call me on it. I really do think that the recommendation that came out last session from the committee was just fabulous, and I'm sorry that it didn't get the attention that I hoped it would get. David, do you want to comment on why that it didn't get that attention?
Sorry, I was diverted by a question from institutions. I'm sorry, I was diverted by a question from institutions about National Guard members and class attendance. I was needing to deal with right away. Could you repeat that? I apologize.
Yeah, I was just saying how personally I thought that the graduation bonus recommendation that came out of the committee last round. That I thought it was a terrific recommendation. I mean, it was so simple and clear, and it really spoke to the goals of 60 by 30. I mean, it was something that, everybody could in the state could simply, it didn't have a whole number of kind of performance indicators. It was simply, where are we increasing the number of degrees? Are we graduating students that come in underprepared? And are we funding the programs that we need to fund in order to take those underprepared students and make them and get and support them to become successful graduates? So it seemed to me that it was a very kind of credible and viable kind of proposition, but it obviously did not get much attention from the past legislature. And I'm just curious as to your reaction as to why that was.
I think it was a very good recommendation. I recall the committee discussions, and that it was one of the few proposals where, there was a similar reaction regardless of the nature of your student body, that it addressed institutions who had students who were perhaps less prepared and would make more money available, because we know it takes some extra resources to make that happen. I think it's important to note, many of us believe that a lot of progress has been made in terms of completion. We have further to go, but we know that that did take resources, and we thought that plan put that forward in perspective. But for those institutions who maybe are fortunate to have students who are very, very well prepared, that they receive some resources as well. And those of us who have taught know that even those good students need some help occasionally. But I thought it was a good plan. I'd have to say that you guys would be in a better position to know. It wasn't clear that once we got to the session, there was a great deal of support from the institutions for the plan. I can't say for sure, but I do know that there's always an issue, is there enough money to fund it or not? And I know that everyone would have liked to have had more money to make that happen. But I think if you guys think that still is a good approach and we work together, I think we can get closer, but we do have the limitations of just what's going on in the state right now in terms of resources. We may need even to stay even. I think we all have that concern, but providing the help students need isn't free. Is that responsive, Ed?
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, are there any comments?
I see none, sir. I would like to say Dr. Keller was able to join us, so he's present. Welcome.
Thank you.
I will add.
Would you like to think about that formula piece, the graduation bonus piece?
I'm sorry, we missed the question.
I was going to ask Dr. Hoyt, because she was involved in this last time, and I was that she had any comments about the graduation bonus that might help give the committee a context for that charge.
Thanks, Ed. I think there was very good support from the commissioner, the staff, as well as the coordinating board members themselves when we presented. The three different chairs presented the formula recommendations. And for the graduation bonus, I think it was just, again, more of a revenue funding issue as not, obviously the commissioner recommended that. It just was not, did not choose to be funded, I guess, at the state level at that point in time after the recommendations were made.
Yeah, I think that we'll have a robust conversation about this, and I will try to kind of understand it, that this is something that, there's no question that, as David has said, that the revenue picture being very depressed to the part of our recommendation was that the most important thing was to fund the formula as close to our recommendation as possible. So it was really a recommendation of $200 million as an add-on, and there just wasn't that $200 million wasn't going to be there, and I think everybody else kind of lost sight of it. But anyway, we'll discuss that next time. On charge number 3 is to study and make recommendations on the treatment of competency-based courses in the formula allocations. Texas A&M Commerce and South Texas have started their competency education programs in the spring of 2014. The CBE is growing in Texas. In March 2017, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board awarded grants to 4 four institutions as part of their Texas Affordable Baccalaureate Degree Program. Dr. Eklund will be available to present more information on the CBE in September. And Julie, could you just say a little bit about the challenge that we have on this? I mean, it's really connecting CBEs to the formula and the challenge of kind of dealing with sort of semester credit hours.
Yes, and this has been a challenge because competency-based education, and I think its purest form, folks might say, isn't or doesn't necessarily have to be tied to semester credit hours and to organize coursework. But currently in the state, and I believe for the most part nationally, it has been because of financial aid and the interest in being able to link financial aid awards to coursework and to have a way to identify the work that students are doing. And in this state, thus far, we have only seen competency-based education that is linked to coursework, and that in terms of the programs at Commerce and South Texas College, they were funded at the end of the semester for successful completion. I think a lot of those programs were designed around modules, but again, that were linked to coursework, to semester credit hours, so that courses from the ACGM could be, or from a course inventory at the university, they could be reported to us. The work was happening in terms of it was being completed in terms of competency-based education, but it was also tied to coursework, and the expectation was that at least 50% of the work wasn't being determined based on a prior learning assessment, which is where a student would take a test to show they already know the material, but at least 50% had to be based on current instructional activity that the student was engaging in. We have moved forward this fall where we have sent information to institutions that funding for competency-based, because we've seen this expansion to some of the new TAB programs at schools, that the funding just for this fall at least will be based on a census date and an indication that the students have begun engaging with the coursework. But we are looking to this committee to certainly have discussions around not only what should funding look like that's tied to coursework, but thinking ahead, which is, I think, really important to the day when competency-based education will not just be tied to coursework, but might be around a program, for example, where a certain number of modules, a certain amount of work needs to be completed to complete a program that isn't linked. So we know there's changes coming down the pike in terms of that, and we're hoping we'll be able to have good, rich discussions around what we think that should look like. But I think there's also an immediate need to discuss the funding for those competency-based courses that are linked directly to the courses that we have.
I visited Texas A&M Commerce and spent a day up there reviewing their CBE program, and it's really remarkable what they've done. And it is definitely on the cutting edge, and it is a shame that in a certain way, the innovation that's coming through the pedagogy is we're not keeping up with it in terms of finding ways to fund it, and innovative ways to fund it, that we have to, I'm not blaming just Texas, because the federal government still has to have SCHs and courses in order to operate their Pell program. So, we need innovation, but when we see it, sometimes there's a lag in us responding, at least financially, to it. So that will be a difficult conversation, because I know how difficult it is to get work around SCH. So, Tom, are there any comments, questions?
I see none, sir.
Any questions or comments on everybody on the phone?
This is Dana again. I guess on that one, the discussion, if you remember last time, also surrounded the fact that usually for cost studies we have more than two kind of in, two institution or two cost centers to be able to accumulate and analyze costs. And that was one of the competency-based issues that we ran into last time without more institutions in the state to be able to look at. Nationally, there are a few. I still think that the DOE is dealing with some issues on how we can allocate financial aid based on competency, and so it was a very thorough discussion last time, I think, but it's still a difficult issue even today.
Yes, and I don't think our enrollments, based on the last couple of years, I know 2 years ago, we talked about maybe we'll have better data for this committee, but we're seeing more expansion now with these new programs we mentioned, but I don't think the data is necessarily there yet from those two programs to provide any additional insight than what we saw when we tried to look at a cost study based on those 2 years ago.
Any other comments? Okay, let's, Julie, talk a little bit about next meetings, and both in terms of the calendar. Let's start with the calendar, and then we'll talk about assignments. You have the calendar that you can put up.
I'm going to hand that over to Tom. I think everyone has the calendar in their materials. Do you have a page number that they can turn to, or? Page 44.
Page 4.
Thank you, Ms. Lynn.
One point, Ed, and I mentioned to you via email earlier, the meeting's currently scheduled for October 11th. There were several friction points with people's calendars. We do have this room available and logged for October 19th, if that's acceptable to the group.
So can you put consideration on the table for October 19th?
Ed, are you wanting people to weigh in on whether they're available or not? Or are we just getting some dates down, and then there'll be a process for doing that?
I think that what Tom is recommending or is asking right now, he's checked on the availability of the facility on the 19th, and he's wondering if if the 19th would work for most everybody. If we need to run it as a process, we can do it between meetings. In other words, Tom, we could poll everybody and then determine which. The 19th it might be fine for me, but it might not be for others. So should we run it as a process, as a poll that we'll do online?
Yes, what I'll do is I'll send out a block email to everyone. I know while we'd like to stay abreast to every minute in our calendars while we sit here, that's just not possible, and things do pop up. So I will send out an email, and you can respond, and we can adjust from there. And I think if you guys want to leave it up to Ed to make that final call based on the feedback that you provide, that may be a good way to go about it.
Is that acceptable to the committee?
Works for me.
That's good.
I see a lot of people doing the drinking bird on this end.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit, Julie, about, normally we try to work till November to try to finalize everything. Is that correct? And then that December meeting is most of the time we do not do that, because around that time everything gets very difficult on everybody's calendar. So we'll have a meeting in September, October, and then try to finish up in November. Is that correct?
That would be great if we could do that. Obviously, we are happy to meet in December if that meeting is needed, and we do prefer to try to keep a December meeting on the calendar just in case we need to move into December. But I know in the past, especially with the GAI group, they have generally finished in November. And Tom, is that correct? Do we have a tentative date for December if we need it?
We have dates locked in for December 6th and also for January 10th if the committee's deliberations require.
Okay.
Okay, so having a sense of the calendar, I think that what I'd like is some sort of idea from the committee about the focus for our September meeting. If I could get some comments from around the table, I'd appreciate it. This is important because if we want the staff to give us the data that we would need to have a informed discussion, then anything that we can do at this time will help them prepare materials that we can use, and then we could have in advance of that meeting. So are there ideas? You heard the scope of the work and you heard the charges. Are there a sense of what the focus of the September meeting should be?
Ed, this is Susan Brown. I was thinking that we were going to talk about the cost study issue.
Okay, so let's put that down as one. Other suggestions?
Hi, John Davidson from UT Arlington. Could we also have, and this may be covered and I'm just not familiar enough with it yet, but how historically the percentage split between the facilities space and the utilities was determined? I know you gave us those percentages, but I wasn't clear how that was determined.
Sure, you'd like some more detail on that. We're happy to provide that, yeah. I think we'll plan on a presentation on the cost study. We'll include that information also in terms of the split. And please do let us know if there's any materials that you need that aren't available. We'll send you the link to where we have the cost study information from past years available online.
I will just insert something that, Julie, I think it'd be really good if we sort of did a little, at the beginning of the meeting, a little bit of an introduction to the 60 by 30 plan. I know that we've probably all heard it many times, but I do think that it's important for us to, as we look at the formula and look at the things that make up the formula, if we look at what our goals are for 2030 and what we think will, how we can use the formula to create incentives to drive us towards those goals. So if we could prepare just something on the kind of method that we're looking at with the 60 by 30 plan.
I think that's an excellent idea, and I'm happy to do that. And I know the commissioner this morning did charge you with thinking about that throughout your process. I know that was one of the charges to the last committee, and we just felt strongly that should be overarching all of the discussions. So I'd be pleased to do that.
I think it makes an interesting lens to look at the cost study. I will tell you that that's what's making me think of it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Any other suggestions for topics for September?
I might make a suggestion. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I would say if there's any additional data or information on the competency base that could be sent out with that as well.
Sure, we'd be happy to do that. I was going to say we had included that I would do some kind of a short presentation on competency base. So although most of the work, I think it sounds like, will be focused on the cost study piece, maybe if I do that short presentation, we do send you materials about competency base, then you'll have that to be thinking about for a later meeting. The other suggestion was going to be that David Young, who's not here today because he, I believe, is with the HRI group, he was very involved in working with the committee on the graduation bonus, and he volunteered to come and do a short presentation on that, which might give you something to think about again for later meetings to have a little more background. So if you'd like to include that, we can, or we could save that again for the October meeting.
Good presentation, Julie, especially for the new members.
Yeah, I think that's important. It's while I kind of would like to do deep dives on some topics, I think the threads of the three charges need to evolve over the meetings, and So if we don't do some homework on competency base and graduation bonus, when we get to October, we won't be in good shape to do the deep dives into those subjects. So we probably do some balance between the two.
Great. We'll be happy to put those presentations together, and of course, focus the materials again on the matrix.
Any other comments or questions or recommendations? I know that the one thing that that does sort of ultimately guide what comes out of the formula is what kind of revenues are available. And I'm wondering if there's a way to understand the revenues that the state is projecting for the next biennium. I mean, I know that's a real political game, and so there's a great deal of speculation about it. But I will tell you, as we went through the last legislative session, I was thinking that what resulted, which was a lot better than we all feared it would be, was still very inadequate. In fact, I remember the commissioner in a meeting saying, if this is what higher education in Texas is going to receive, then we really do need to think of a different way of moving forward with our institutions. I really believe that's the case. So I don't know, Julie and David, is there any reasonable way to kind of think about getting some reality about the revenue that might be there in the next session of the legislature?
I wish there were. I think we know that there, will be issues going forward. There's so many things up in the air in terms of helping follow up on the flood. There will be issues related to income and what may be happening from the oil industry. We know as a result of what's happening in Houston. So I think this is something we're all going to be dependent upon the controller providing updates. And I suspect that it won't be positive, but I think we need to pay attention to it as we go forward. And as we often know, those estimates change frequently immediately before the legislative session, unfortunately. But it's something we do need to pay attention to, and we can do that. But I think anything that we could find out in the next 2 months would probably be as negative as it might be at any point in time. I would hope it wouldn't get worse after that. But I wish I could tell you, Ed. Okay.
It's just a piece of the reality of our committee, to be honest with you, that we can talk about a lot of things, and but ultimately the resources determine much of what actually happens, and it's useful in our discussion sometimes to remind ourselves of that. And so if we're going to make progress or advances, we really got to find other kind of creative ways of doing that. Okay, any other comments or questions before we adjourn?
Yeah, I just want to quickly add that when you hear the commissioner talk about the money, his viewpoint is typically trying to be realistic going forward to the legislature, while at the same time supporting to whatever extent is needed, but doesn't want to seem that higher ed is naive and is not aware of other issues. But I do think it's important that you clearly discuss what you need during this process, and if it's not available, what would be the ramifications for that.
Good. Any other comments?
Ed, this is Noelle Sloan. I apologize, I'm stepping backwards in the conversation a little bit, but I was wondering, Mr. Keaton, when you send out the polling for availability, if we could also look at availability morning versus afternoon, if that's an option for us.
And I would put that to the group, Ed, to see where the general feelings are. Historically, these have been afternoon meetings. Certainly will accommodate or make any attempt to accommodate the wishes of the committee, but I think that's more of a, if you want to discuss that here.
I can notice, I've noticed while traveling around the state that Southwest Airlines has changed their schedules a lot, and from some of your locations, there are many fewer flights available. I suspect that's where you're coming from in your question, but I think we ought to be aware that part of this is making it as easy as possible for everyone to get here.
Ed, I will include a preference in the email when I pull it out for any changes or necessary changes as far as a preference AM, PM, and then I'll vector that through you for final if that's acceptable to the committee.
From my point of view, that would be a good way to kind of get a sense of the committee. I think so. Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Everybody here said aye, Ed.
Said aye. One thing we can be unanimous about. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Aye.
All in favor, say aye. 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 Everybody here said aye, Ed.
Aye. Nothing we can be unanimous about. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.